Welcome back, everyone, to the Fly Culture podcast. This one's being recorded on September the 24th. We're perilously close to the end of the fishing season, and I'm looking forward to doing a little bit more fishing before we finish on the 30th of September. I haven't decided what it's going to be yet, but it's sort of back-end fishing at the moment, that sparse hatches. I found some rising fish, but not in any meaningful way at the moment. And it may be we've had some rain here as well, so it may be I try and swing some flies for some salmon too. Thanks, everyone, for the feedback for the very latest issue of Fly Culture as well. I'm really thrilled to see that you're enjoying that, and thank you for tagging us. Thank you for letting us know that you're enjoying that. So thanks very much indeed for that. I'm really excited to be joined again today for the second time by Gareth Lewis. We were chatting recently, and he shares a love of fishing books. I'm sure many of the listeners do as well, and we chat about them from time to time. And we thought it would be really cool to pick a selection of our 5 favourite fishing books, talk through them a little bit, and read a little short excerpt from it as well, to give you a flavour, if you haven't read them already, to give you a flavour of what they're about. And with winter coming, I guess, fishing books are a pretty nice thing to have, and when you're not on the river yourself, that it'll make up the difference just a little bit. So hopefully this will. But it's great to have you back, Gareth. How's it going?
Yeah, thanks, Pete. I think we last chatted back in March, didn't we? I think it was just 2 days after the Wales lockdown. Great times they were. But yeah, it's been good. Considering everything else, it's been quite busy still. Fishing has been pretty good. It's been a while, and it's been good.
Great. How do you feel about the end of the season coming? Are you come to terms with that? Are you going to be doing some grayling fishing? How's your season been as well?
Season's pretty good. So I think early May, I think our lockdown restrictions were relaxed, so we could get out locally. But I'm kind of spoiled for choice locally. We've got quite a few nice rivers. So really, it was just getting back to a few plans I'd made during the winter to get back on those small streams. I think I've focused on the Usk, quite a lot over the last 2 seasons. So it was just getting back to basics and grassroots. I think my back was in bits, I think, after all that crawling around on small streams. But fast approaching 40 next year. I think. I need to. It's nice to get back on the bigger rivers then, just to open the shoulders, I think, and less bending over and everything else. But it was good. Early July then we were able to get out a little further afield, so a little bit more exploring. I think at one point I had a couple of weeks off, so that was great, just to explore a couple of rivers that I've not fished for quite a while. I think I guided on them around 5, 6, even 7 years ago last. And you know what it's like. You don't really fish. You're hosting and making sure your clients are happy. So it was nice to get back out. And of course, during the lockdown, the good silver lining, which we'll touch on today, was the amount of reading and fly tying and other sort of fishing related activities that we got into. But you're right. Coming up to the end of the season, then the trees are changing colour. It's a little sunnier today, but the morning started off a little colder, a little blustery, some rain. And our end of the season, or certainly my last day, will probably be this Sunday coming, the 27th, I believe. I'll aim to spend that on the Usk, and it's a sad day, it always is. But quite a few plans made, I think, for this winter, depending again on the COVID situation. But we'll be chasing grayling somewhere in the cold mid Wales, hopefully.
Fantastic. I know we were talking off mic, and I was saying to you that I seem to feel okay about it being end of season because I'm not guiding anymore. So I've managed to do a lot more fishing, and I've almost not had my fill, because I never will. But I'm pretty okay with it at the moment. And like you say, and I think in the previous podcast we did, that you'd said you'd not done so much grayling, and we're planning to do a little bit more of that. And I'm kind of looking forward to that. And particularly with grayling, I love the part of it, certainly from my point of view, that there's a breakfast with friends beforehand, COVID allowing it, and we sit down, we chat for a while and drink coffee and eat unhealthy food, and really that is part of it as well. And it may end up, an hour or two on the river, and that's fine by me. It's just a segment of it. Really, the fishing is that happy byproduct of it. So it'll be really interesting to see how that goes. I think I've got one more salmon in me. I don't think it's going to happen. We've tried really, really hard, but no joys on that front. But we'll keep going. But one of the interesting things I wanted to ask you was that I've noticed your social media posts of late, and also the article you wrote in issue 8 of Fly Culture, and more sort of that sort of ties in, I guess, with what I was just saying, that you're looking at fishing as a whole, not the end product of catching that fish and everything else, and quite reflective. And like you mentioned there about end of season, the trees are changing color, all of those things. Do you sense and do you sense there is a little bit of a change, that the fishing's moving away from here's the great big fish type thing, this is what it's about, to it's about a broader range of things, the experiences and everything to go with that? Do you sense that? I've certainly have with your social media posts. So I thought I really wanted to ask you that.
I think so. Yeah. I like a bit of, and we'll certainly come on to this today. Really, I mean, the books that I've chosen are more around the the adventure side. Yeah. So yes, they heavily relate to fishing, but at the same time, like you say, the grip and grin. Here's a fish I caught today. Um, the fish. It's nice to see that fish, but it's also nice to be taken through the story of how that how that person got to that fish. Was it a tricky sort of cast? Was it underneath the overhanging sort of branch? It's just be a bit more flavoursome with the wording. And it's like tying flies, isn't it? I mean, materials that you tie together, then why shouldn't be a short little blog post or even 140 word letter sort of Twitter post be sort of tied together. So instead of the fur and feather, we've got some words that are tied together to make that lovely looking end product. So yeah, it's just being a bit more romantic about the whole thing, I think, and being taken through that journey with that poster, whether it be on social media or within a book. So yeah, it's just about enjoying that experience with the author, I suppose.
Do you think that is a evolution of social media, that it is going that way? Rather, it's not been exhausted, but that sort of post of fish and everything else, do you think this is how we're seeing an evolution? I'm thinking also about the lead off piece in the current copy of Fly Culture from Clark Coleman, and that's very, very similar as well. And some of the other articles that we have in there are along those sorts of lines. Do you think that is a little bit of a change that we're starting to see in social media as a whole?
Possibly, yeah. There's a couple of guys that I certainly follow. I think the main one is Stefan Larsson from Sweden. He doesn't really, his pictures are great. They're not always, trout or grayling centric. Sometimes it's a picture of being sat on the riverbank with a beer or a cigar, just looking out at the river. Well, that in itself is a nice shot, but then the words he puts around that are sometimes quite beautiful. That it may be that he's just been skunked by a fish, or he's messed up and right, let's go sit on the edge of the river. So that sort of adds to that imagery of what as the viewer you're looking at, and then you can sort of you've got your internal smile that, well, I've been in that position, or my ass has been kicked by that trout or grayling. So yeah, I think it, yeah, you're right. I think there's more people starting to think more, certainly, about what they post, rather than just because we all see millions of pictures of fish and rods and reels and all this type of stuff, and that's just easy to do, isn't it? But if we can give a nice flavor to that imagery, just to enhance what that poster is trying to say, then the better for it, I think.
And it's interesting you touched on, getting skunked by the fish or whatever. It is okay, isn't it? It's okay to get caught in a tree. It's okay to miss a fish that's right. It doesn't matter that much, does it? It's okay, isn't it?
Yeah, and that's how we learn. We don't learn through, yes, okay, we learn through, sort of positive learning of, yeah, I just got it. But, as human nature, we learn certainly more. And this isn't just fishing related. This could be about your job, life in general. We all go through ups and downs, and generally those negative um, stories or parts of our lives, generally, you're going to remember those a lot, damn sight better. So if you're going to lose a fish of a lifetime for a specific reason, the knot could have blown or whatever, then you're going to make sure that knot is tied every single time going forward. So yeah, absolutely.
I know I used to, when I was guiding, I used to put not latterly, but I used to feel that I was under so much pressure that if I was fishing with somebody, that if I missed a fish, or I was expected on the water to catch the most fish, well, you should have done because you're a fishing guide. And if you didn't, then you can't be any good.
Mm-hmm.
And it took me some time to get used to that and accept it and not worry about it. And I fly fish because it's not competitive. I don't want to catch the most fish. I don't want to get the most likes. It doesn't matter to me in that sense. And it was interesting to be able to release that and just enjoy it so much more for what it was. But there was a spell, and it was a short spell, where I did feel under extreme pressure because of my work. But thankfully, that went relatively quickly.
Good, good.
Yeah. Right. So we've had some great conversations, and I know, we chatted about John Girack's latest book, which I know we're huge fans of and shaped by. And what we've done is Gareth and I have both selected 5 books that we think you might find interesting. They mean a lot to us. We've enjoyed reading them. And I don't know what Gareth has chosen. He doesn't know what I've chosen. There may be a snap situation, which could be really cool as well if that happens. So we can talk and we can actually read an excerpt. They may be different excerpts we've chosen as well. So hopefully you're going to find this really, really interesting. I'm really looking forward to this one and hearing a little bit about Gareth's choices. We said if we'd chosen the Girac book, we'd probably argue over which one we were going to do. But I suspect I've steered clear of that just from a safety point of view, and I suspect you probably have too. So if we lead off with you, Gareth, you choose the first one. Tell us the first one that you've chosen, and we'll chat a little bit about it, and then perhaps you can read us a little bit from it too.
Yeah, of course. So this one is by an author that just kind of makes me laugh. So this one is Trout Magic by Robert Traver, or that was his pen name, wasn't it? So I think he was John Vulker, I want to say. So yeah, quite an old book actually. This, I think it was initially released in 1974. Strangely, there's a bit of a theme with my books. They're kind of all old, apart from one. But yeah, so Trout Magic, I think Traver is one of the big names up there. Obviously, a noted lawyer back in his day. I think and from the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. So lots of great fishing in and around, and lots of hunting. So I think that's where his stories sort of tie into. But there always seems to be some sort of funny, sort of light-hearted item within each of his short essays. Considering he worked for the Supreme Court of Michigan, he was always sort of, either checking his watch or looking at the clock for when he could get out and fish with sort of his strange buddies that would always add some sort of comedy to the stories. But again, brilliant sort of light-hearted stories. They've got a lot of sentiment about some of them. You know that there's some other stuff going on beneath the surface, or in his head at that time. But yeah, just brilliant. So he's either sort of stumbling up sort of lakes, beaver ponds, rivers, run-ins with bears and things like that. So yeah, absolutely. Trout Magic, brilliant. And if I can cheat a little and also kind of add Trout Madness, which was from 1960, then the two of them are just brilliant reads.
Do you think because of his job that those books were sort of a bit of a release or an escape from his everyday life to be able to talk about something that he loved so much?
Yeah, it's got to be, I think, isn't it? I think, well, from an outsider looking in, the world of law strikes me as a little drab. God, and this is coming from a guy in IT. It's got to be very black and white, very rule based. God, yeah. Well, there you go. Quite like IT. It's just a mirror world. So absolutely, yeah. If he can have some sort of light-hearted release, like you say, then brilliant. But you do sense the absolute joy and love that he has from his trips out. Yeah, just a brilliant book.
And would you be able to, Gareth, give us a little sense of it? Have you chosen a short excerpt that you can read us from it?
I have, yeah. So this
Brilliant.
one might be a minute or so of a read,
Fine.
but this is actually called "The Testament of a Fisherman," and it's a short that actually started the book even before sort of any sort of preface or any sort of chapter one. So yeah, "Testament of a Fisherman," and this kind of sums up. I think a lot of us when we first read this kind of hit home about what fishing sort of means to us. It's not necessarily the fish. So I fish because I love to, because I love the environment where trout are found, which are invariably beautiful, and hate the environs where crowds of people are found, which are invariably ugly. Because of all the television commercials, cocktail parties, and assorted social posturing, I thus escape. Because in a world where most men seem to spend their lives doing things they hate, my fishing is at once an endless source of delight and an act of small rebellion. Because trout do not lie or cheat or cannot be bought or bribed or impressed by power, but respond only to quietude and humility and endless patience. Because I suspect that men are going along this way for the last time, and I, for one, don't want to waste the trip. Because mercifully, there are no telephones on trout waters, because only in the woods can I find solitude without loneliness, because bourbon out of an old tin cup always tastes better out there, because maybe one day I will catch a mermaid, and finally, not because I regard fishing as being so terribly important, but because I suspect that so many of the other concerns of men are equally unimportant and not nearly so much fun.
Beautiful. That sums it up perfectly, doesn't it? About why we do it, why we go out to fish, where we choose to go, and what we hope from it. I think that's given me little goosebumps, actually. It's a beautiful piece, wasn't it?
Yeah, and again, I think Trout Magic and Trout Madness, it was tough, really. I think I had to choose, Testament of a Fisherman, but there are so many. What I kind of like to do, um, with scraps of paper and this and that. When I'm reading a book, I'll shove a little scrap of paper in a certain page where there's a nice sort of quote or extract that I like to sort of type up into a little file. And I've got reams of these little excerpts, really. So that one was kind of the obvious go-to. But with Robert Traver, there are so many sort of beautiful little excerpts like that yeah, they just really sum up why we do it, I think.
Perfect. That's a great one to kick off with. So I've got to come back with something now then. So I'm going a little bit newer, and I'm going with a book. I've got a suspicion there may be a chance that you've chosen this one, but I could be wrong. It's by Kirk Wallace Johnson, and it's called The Feather Thief. And I think it's a really fascinating book. Is this in your selection?
It's not. No, you're safe.
No, I had a sense it might be. And what it explores is the darker side of fishing, really, or fly tying, really. And it tells the story of Edwin Rist and how he breaks into the Natural History Museum's store centre in Tring in Hertfordshire. And what he does is steal feathers from a collection and from Alfred Wallace, who actually, I read his book about his trip that was in parallel with Darwin. He doesn't always get the same sort of publicity that Darwin did, but about natural selection and everything else. And he was out there, and his life was extraordinary, and what he went through to get these feathers. There was lots of other things that he collected that went to the museum, and they were broken into. And there was a tying forum, I believe. I delved into it a little bit after I'd read the book, about people who tied, and it circles around the world of tying classic salmon flies with rare materials, and it's about how people chased down these rare materials. And he ultimately sold some of them. He was obsessed with tying these flies himself and having the right materials. But what actually happened was that he sold them, and then it was interesting how the ranks closed. They never really found out who bought all of these things, but it was kind of interesting. It was a darker side of things that I never really knew existed, but it's a really fascinating read. Really, really interesting. And it's almost like a crime thriller in some respects. And the writer goes into it in quite a bit of depth. He's a fly angler as well, which is really cool. So he sees that side of it. But I was going to read a very short section of it, and it's where Edwin starts tying and how that obsession starts. Their first instructor was a 75-year-old Princeton-educated evolutionary biology professor named George Hooper, an expert on insect life and an avid fly fisherman. He approached tying like a biologist, using head-mounted dissection magnifiers and microscopes, referring to fish by their Latin binomial names and selecting from among what seemed to Edwin like 10,000 colours of wool to fill out the bodies of his flies. Under Hooper's tutelage, Edwin tied flies and piles of them that he had no idea how to cast. He didn't even own a fly rod. He just liked the challenge of replicating what he saw in the Orvis video and in his magazines. And that, to me, was the start of the road to ruin for him, really, and how this obsession grew from there. But it's a really fascinating book and a really, really interesting one. Do you know that one, Gareth?
I didn't actually. I knew that, so that's based on the true events. Is that right? Yeah, and
Yes,
I'd
it's a true
certainly
story.
heard about that. So I didn't know it was there was a book released that covered it. So yeah, that I've just added to my list. Funny enough, so there'll be a couple of purchases made this evening, I think, after this. No, that yeah, that sounds fantastic. And I think there's still quite a lot of the you mentioned there that that they were never quite sure about where or who the buyers were. Yeah, that would be interesting to work out.
Yeah. There was all these super rare species
Mm,
of birds, because I believe what happened was that there was a marketplace for Victorian, Edwardian, I guess, hats that were decorated with these feathers
yeah.
that from birds that were found in rare locations. And so people were buying up these hats to be able to get the feathers. And of course, that supply started to dry up. And then these came onto the market that were, in fantastic condition. And from what I remember, they were trading at ridiculous amounts of money as well. So there's a lot of money spent on it as well. So it's really, really interesting. So yeah, it's a fascinating book to read. And like I say, it shows perhaps the darker side of fly fishing that many of us don't really know exists.
No, no. Well, where there's money, there'll be theft. So
Yeah.
yeah.
So what you got next?
Right. So book number two. Right, I gotta be careful with this one. It's a bit of an obvious choice, but it may show on your list. So this one is A River Never Sleeps by Mr. Hague Brown. Uh, yeah. So Hague Brown's work is kind of scripture within fly fishing now, isn't it? I think I was quite late to this one. I sort of only picked up certainly A River Never Sleeps. Was it last year? But I hadn't actually read it until the start of lockdown. So again, we were talking about silver linings of lockdown and everything else earlier on off mic. So yeah, this one obviously again another old book, bit of an old boy again was Roderick, born 1908, and I think was he Dorset? I want to say. I think it was.
I
Um,
think it was,
yeah,
yes. I think so.
um,
I'm not 100% sure, but I think so.
yeah. I know he was sort of down south, and then obviously spent a lot of his days in British Columbia, didn't he? So yeah, again, it's a beautifully written piece, less sort of light-hearted, I would say, but certainly the amount of passion in this book and from the extracts, are just beautiful things themselves. We talked earlier about swapping fur and feather out for words and just tying something together, and he just sort of manages to do that. So from an excerpt piece or quote, then I kind of have two short ones, but he sort of summed up, when we look at a river, and a river is water in its loveliest form. Rivers have life and sound and movement, an infinity of variation. Rivers are veins of the earth through which the lifeblood returns to the heart. So, not a mention of fish or, catching a big fish or wanting a grip and grin. He's just, it just sort of captured the beauty there of a day on the river, really, or one sight or one view. And then lastly, I remember the good evenings I have fished, even the ones that realized material hopes, not by the fish that came to the fly, but by the color and movement of the water and the sky, by the sounds and scents and gentle stirrings that were all about me. So again, no fish sort of brought to the net. Again, he's just describing a beautiful moment in an environment that he loves. So that, and again, much like Travor, so many to choose from. So I think those two kind of sum that book up for me. But there's so many. If you can get your hands on Hague Brown's books now, they're quite rare. I imagine there might be some thievery going on there too, Pete.
Oh, not more dark side. He needs little introduction, really, does he? His books are, as you say, much loved, and as you say, beautifully crafted as well, and capture again exactly how we feel about it, and that sort of, I guess, passed down to subsequent writers, and who it must have influenced them as well, mustn't it? Further down the lines too, that these guys were, I guess, we've always had writing from fishing about fishing as well, but those classic Hemingway, those sorts of writers as well, that have a subsequent impact on perhaps some of the books we're reading today, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've read a couple of interviews with Mr. Girac, and he's referenced Hague Brown quite a few times in his sort of career. So absolutely, yeah, somebody as big as John Girac, referencing Hague Brown, that's hell of a credit.
It's interesting you should mention him, because it made me think of him a little bit when you were reading that. So it's kind of interesting. So yeah, like that. Very good. Right, my one. Some people, this may resonate with some people. It's a book by Hal Raines, and it's called Fly Fishing Through the Midlife Crisis. And it's part autobiography. It's a collection of short pieces, and he's a writer. He'd worked on newspapers, so it's well crafted, and I think he has won a Pulitzer Prize as well for his writing as well. So really, really interesting American-based story, but it is about, I guess, realizing your mortality and realizing you're getting a little bit older. But it's wittily written as well. It's amusing as well. And as you said that you're approaching 40, this seems quite appropriate then, Gareth. It's a short bit called The Black Dog. In 1983, I turned 40 and directed my attention to the question of why the sadness of the streaker was upon me. It was not a big sadness, but it was there, even with 200 people in the house. Everyone at the party admired the present that Susan had secretly prepared, a photograph album entitled 40 Years of Fishing. The first page was a picture of me and 20 crappies from South Sauty. Succeeding pages showed me holding large dead fish all over Alabama, Florida, and Louisiana. As you flipped through the pages, the fish grew larger, and I grew older. There were pictures of Jerry and me with fish, and the boys and me with fish. I was touched by the gesture. A great deal of work had gone into the album, but I was oppressed by the message it held for me alone. I, who had set out to be a great fisherman, was a middling one at best. I'd never caught a marlin or a tarpon or a bonefish, and I'd spent countless hours of fishing of all kinds, but I was truly expert at no kind. And he sort of looks at fishing as a whole, and in that sort of sense, a little bit more light-hearted, and realizes he's probably not the greatest angler in the world. He's a wonderful reader, but again, a little bit different and a little bit. I like the humor in it as well. It's a fun book to read.
Oh, great. And as you rightly say, yeah, the midlife crisis, I think, as that ever dawns. That's another for my list. maybe you can give us some tips.
What's your next one? What you got for me?
Okay, number three. So this is from a fly tying hero, I suppose. Again, another bit of an oldie before I go on to more of the modern books. But this one is the Fly and the Fish by John Atherton. Obviously, he's obviously known as one of the great Catskill style fly tyers. Again, an old chap, I think born 1900, and he was an impressionistic artist. So everything he sort of viewed in life, he would sort of break down into their core components rather. So that came into place when he would design a fly. So I think his most widely known flies are the Atherton number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And I actually used the Atherton number 5 during early season March Brown hatches. It's a big sort of bushy Catskill style pattern, which works wonders in those hatches. So, and again, rather than sort of look at his fly designs as right, the body is brown, you know, that brown can be made up of a myriad of different colors, and that's how he sort of viewed life, you know, sort of tiny variations of tone, and that's how his book was put together, and certainly that's how his flies were designed. So again, this quote was how the book was opened, and it sort of goes back to when he was a small child and really got dragged into or fell into that into this weird world that we all love. But this one, if I start, so the river flowed smooth and dark beneath the fringing alders. Here and there on the surface, little rings broke the reflections, and occasionally a splash showed white against the bank. A boy was lying prone, peering over the grass into the clear water, his breath quickly as he saw a big tail appear in the center of a ring, waving slowly from side to side before it quietly sank again. There was life in the air as well. Tiny gauze-winged forms were rising and dipping over the water, sometimes lightly touching its smooth surface. The boy looked upward to watch them. He raised himself and grasped an alder branch for support. He felt a delicate touch on his hand, and turning, saw the insect resting there, its wings slowly opening and closing. It was an exquisite creature. The wings nearly transparent, or iridescent pearly color. The upcurved body was shaded darker on the back, tapering to the slender whisks of a long tail. The eyes protruded prominently and were colored a wonderful violet. It held its long front legs in an almost supplicating attitude, and all its legs were marked with color, speckled and delicately shaded. What an incredibly beautiful thing, he thought. And again, that's just page 1. So the whole book sort of goes on to touch on fishing and flies, and again, this sort of theme of variation of tones and colors. So a brilliant book. I mean, if you're a fly tyer and love fly tying, if you're interested in Catskills or both, then a must read, The Fly and the Fish. Wonderful.
It's really interesting, and again, the descriptive nature of it. So it sort of takes you there, and you can sort of, in your mind's eye, imagine. And it's interesting. So lucky with the magazine that we get so many great writers, but I get lots of emails from people saying, I'd like to write a piece. I've never written something before, or they'll send me something. And I say, well, you're describing it, but I don't know what you're describing. And tell me, and that's a perfect example of it, isn't it? Actually, all of the pieces there have been that you've read so far, and take people there, and that does that perfectly, doesn't it? I can imagine exactly what he's talking about: the fish, the rise, everything else that goes with it, and that does the job beautifully, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think so. Again, we talked earlier, didn't we, about being sort of taken on that journey with that author, and I think that sums up. I think by that third paragraph, you're that little kid, peering over into the pond. Just that grabbed me, I think. And if the first 3 paragraphs of a book just sort of steal you away from the real world, then it's done its job very well.
Yeah, excellent choice. Right, my next one, The Trout's Tale, by Chris Newton. Really interesting book. It talks about, I guess, really the faded British Empire and the need to want for people living throughout the empire wanting and missing their trout fishing, and how people got trout into weird and wonderful places. And I was sort of flicking, I read it a little while back now, and I was sort of flicking through it yesterday, and they're talking about Tasmania and how they got the trout into New Zealand, and that's fantastic. But the damage these things did as well is worth mentioning. I think there was a species, if I remember, it's off the top of my head now, in New Zealand that was completely wiped out after the introduction. And that is the downside of this. It's kind of nice and romantic that these fish were introduced so that people could have their trout fishing once again. But how, it did have an impact on the environment there as well. So I think that's worth reading, but mentioning. Sorry, but it's some of the places, and how they went into the looking after the trout down in New Zealand, because I believe it was salmon that they wanted first of all. And they got the salmon into the river, and the salmon just swam off and never came back again. And it was only the trout that thrived. And they were there was a bit of room on the ship to take the eggs down that allowed them to get trout in there. So it's kind of interesting. They were almost there as an afterthought more than anything else. And of course, one of probably the most revered fishing locations in the world. But how they got down there yet. I think there was one in South Africa where the guy, they had this hatchery and everything was working fantastically well. And they got these fish to where they needed to be to put into the river. Yet in South Africa, I think there was a guy who literally threw a bucket of fry in the river, and the fish took from there, amazingly. I don't know if it's the same chap. Again, I was flicking through it yesterday, who was thought he wanted to marry a lady, and they thought he wasn't suitable. So to earn their respect, I think he decided to walk from the top of Africa to the bottom. So it was just amazing. And he was an explorer. He did absolutely everything. But really interesting story of how trout have moved throughout the world. And I know one of my bucket list places is Bhutan, to go fish there for the trout that live there. But the piece I wanted to read was, it's a place we're never going to go to. And it's an island, and it's owned by France. And if I flick back, it'll tell me exactly where it is. It's called Keragulan. And the Keragulan Islands are truly in the middle of nowhere. They line the remote wastes of the South Indian Ocean, 2,500 miles from the coast of South Africa to the northwest, and about the same distance from Australia to the east. The nearest continent is Antarctica, 1,200 miles away. And it is run as a research outpost. And so you can't ever visit there. No one can ever go there unless you work for, I think it's one of the French departments that you get. It sounds quite a inhospitable place. But they put some fish in there because there were no fish. They checked, and there were no other species living in the river. And they put some brook trout in there, which I believe were pretty keen to take a fly. But they put some trout in that went out to sea and came back as sea trout.
Wow.
So, yeah, and you'll get a sense of this as I read this little section from it. And this is some of the guys who work there went out looking. Some of them, they said it's so windy there that a lot of the fishing is done by spinning, simply because it's just so windy. I guess it's a flat sort of place, but a lot of it there, they get situations where they can cast fly as well. But I'm going to read a section. It'll give you a sense of what's happening there. It's one of those places I wanted to read it simply because none of us were ever going to go there. Perhaps somebody listening has worked for one of these departments, but I thought it was kind of interesting. But many times they found themselves casting into the water which had never been fished before by anyone. Indeed, they must have walked where no man had ever walked, gazing on vistas never seen by humans. A guide to the island's rivers and lakes, written by a TAAF expert for the benefit of the colleagues, lists river after river as non-pesh, population, unfished population unknown. We would sometimes walk 25 or 30 kilometres in a day to find a new fishing spot, carrying rifles to shoot the introduced animals we were trying to control, says Albin. We would share our fishing places with elephants, seals, and penguins. Outside Antarctica, there is nowhere in the world more remote and wild than Keragulan. Fishing here is never comfortable. It is always cold and usually very windy. There are just a few days in the year where you might be able to cast a fly, but most of the time the wind is too strong, so we use a spinning tackle. We don't use expensive lures. You don't have to. An ordinary spinner works very well. The sea trout run to extraordinary sizes. The general run of fish, which hit the lures, measure from 45 to 60 centimetres, roughly 3 to 6 pounds, but many are very much larger. The biggest taken by any of the TAAF team so far in 2009 measured 114 centimetres, 44.9 inches, which makes it one of the biggest sea or brown trout ever caught, topped only by 2 fish recorded in a study of the Rio Grande in Patagonia. The world record brown trout taken in Michigan the same year was 3.5 centimetres shorter at 110.5 centimetres. That fish weighed 41 pounds 7 ounces. Even allows for the fact that the sea trout tend to be relatively elongated, this monster must surely have weighed over 40 pounds. Extraordinary place, extraordinary fish, and we're never going there.
Well, we'll have to become researchers, I think, to
yeah.
get to the list, maybe.
I think my French, judging by how I tried to read that, I think my French needs some improvement before I start. What's next up on the list?
Okay, next on my list. Right, so a little bit more modern, this one, but I think this is probably my favorite book. This is The Longest Silence by Tom McGuane, one of Girak's mates, actually, I think. He certainly referenced, and I think they've fished together for some time. I actually own 2 copies of this book for some reason. I think I had the paperback, which I thought I'd lost. So I thought, right, I need to get that book again. So I bought the hardback, and then I found the paperback. So I've got 2. But yeah, absolutely. I think as great as all of the other books in my collection are, I think this one is just brilliant. So if I was allowed to only take one book on a trip or something like that, I think it would have to be that one. I think I actually need to revisit it as well. It's been a couple of years. So lots of back to what we talked about earlier. What I kind of love with these books is the adventure side, really. These short essays, and the author sort of ending up anywhere. I think we go from Iceland to Russia to Colorado, Montana, and it's just a brilliant array of stories. So again, beautiful writing. They're a little more serious, I think, than some of maybe Draver or Girak. But again, sort of refreshes the soul. Does this book, I think? So yeah, I'm gonna have to revisit this one. So it was tough to pull out the one quote from this, so I've got 2, if that's okay.
That's absolutely fine. It's funny you should mention you got 2 copies. I have 2 as well.
Oh, have you?
My wife's bought it for me twice, so I've got the hardback and the paperback as well.
Here you go.
And you obviously saw it and thought, oh yeah, he'll like that one. I've been too polite to say I've already got it. So funnily enough, I've been dipping into it again. When we had lockdown as well, I started reading it again. It's beautiful.
Yeah, it is. Well, there you go. You can keep one for best, Pete, and one for trips. There you go. One will be battered and bruised, and the other in pristine condition. So, yeah, the 2 quotes then, and again, just choosing 2 was quite tough. But so let's take a look. So, but if you can find no higher ideal than out fishing your buddies, catching something big enough to stuff, or winning trophy, you have a lot of work to do before you are what Isaac Walton would call an angler. And I think that's kind of true. You see sort of the new guys come into fishing, and rightly so. It's the rite of passage. I think they want to catch a fish, then all the fish. And I think we covered this in our last podcast, didn't we? And then eventually they sort of plateau out into a sort of chilled, almost zen-like, essence where they just want to enjoy the day out. Like you said, winter fishing is it's just fun. You get to catch up with friends, and you get to eat something that's not particularly good for you, and then maybe get a couple of hours fishing. And then secondly, we have I think this one sort of rings true to a lot of people, that where people call fishing a sport. Well, a lot of us don't really see that, but the quote then is, if fly fishermen have an edge in this elaboration of soul that we resent hearing called a sport, but are too timid to call an art, it is in our willingness to deepen that experience at nearly any personal cost. I think a lot of us can relate to that. That is the reason why we tie flies, not to save money through bulk purchase of hooks and feathers. That is why some of us cannot live without the breath of varnish from the rod tube when we rig up for another holy day. So I think that, in a quote, I think that sums up a lot of it. It's, we call it a way of life and all that romantic stuff, but a lot of us don't see it as a sport. It's something that is a little deeper than that.
Yeah, it runs deep, doesn't it? And I don't think it's ever going to go away, is it? It's kind of with us, isn't it? And if you have it, you have it, and you have it pretty bad, don't you?
Yeah, and I think it was quite funny enough. I mean, I was listening to a podcast with April Vokey and John Girac recently, again for the fifth time. And it's one of those rare sort of podcasts of John out there. But I think he was saying that, because I think she asked that, do you find your passion dips or wanes through life? And he was, well, as you can imagine, Mr. Girac would. Yeah, of course it would. Passion's, a dynamic thing, and it comes and goes. But that essence, I think, is always there. It's just, life gets in the way sometimes, and you've got to prioritize.
Yep, absolutely. Well, another great choice. I'm going to go modern again. We've been really lucky with the magazine to have people who have written books for us, and please look up Chad Van Santen and Russ Beck. They have a couple of books now, and he writes for us, and those guys are absolutely fantastic. Andrew Fowler in South Africa as well wrote a book called Stipple Beauties, which is a lovely part autobiographical. It has poetry in it. It has all sorts of stuff in it, which is really, really good. And we've also had, I'm coming from left field here, and I've got James Gilbreath, and from his latest book, Hooked on Hope. And I just love how he's been a guest on the podcast as well, and we've talked about the book on there, but his lust for life, his lust for fishing, his love of friends, his love of family, and he captures all of those things tied together with fishing. And it's not grand places. It is, he has fished the Spey now, I think, a couple of times, but it's his local river in Clitheroe, the Ribble, and some of the others that he fishes as well. But I got this extract. I tried to dig out the book, and I couldn't find it because I lent it to my friend Perry. But I've got an extract of it here, and it talks about how they name salmon pools, and he just comes at it again from just such a different angle, and it makes me laugh when I read his stuff. And I always say irreverent, offbeat, and funny, and that's how I always try and describe his books. So this talks a little bit about the how he thinks on a club, how pools are named. So on most salmon rivers, the pools arrive at their names through obvious means, mainly because of the foreign objects that have been deposited there. Fridge pool, there's a fridge in it. Bathtub pool, concrete poured into a bath, left to set, and then removed from its bath mould before being dropped into a featureless spot in the river to create a salmon lie. Safe pool, similar situation to bathtub pool. Visualize the scene. Roadside pool, van pulls up, 2 to 4 men jump out and slowly manhandle a medium-sized safe, which they then drop into the river before disappearing double quick sharp. Vauxhall Astropool. You couldn't make it up. I do hope that they deliberately jumped it into the river with the sole intention of making a half-decent holding pool, rather than it being a case of some gormless goons ripped to the tits on Buckfast and barbiturates, thinking they were living some video game. I like the idea of salmon anglers hatching a scheme to improve habitat, and I can imagine their train of thought. These salmon are running straight through here. If only you could make them slow down. What's big and heavy and on wheels? Steve, what are you doing with that old Astra? There's a sort of elegant, romantic Butch and Sundance rapport in between the lines. From the gas pipe to Fiddler's Hole, it can be a real minefield for the uninitiated, but it can also seem very exciting to the new club member who's keen as mustard to immerse themselves in this bright new world. You can spend hours looking for just the right colour of plastic carrier bag that's stuck in a tree on the opposite bank after some wizened old crinkle-cut angler has pointed you in the direction of his secret honey hole. In 200 attempts, he's nabbed 2 salmon, only to find out that the names you've learned are totally different to that used by the locals. Oh yes, we locals often have many names for exactly the same spot. Sewage works, Talbots and Morts are all on the same beat of the Ribble. Never mind the language barrier, although the older I get, the more economical I am with the words. The majority of the beat names have a reasonable logical explanation behind them, but there are some that are so out of left field that they can make your mind hurt and require a deep-sea dive into imagination. I'll give you an example. Baby Elephant is a spot on the Ribble near Clitheroe, and Lamont and I have both tried to find out how it got its name. We thought that there must have been something like a grey rock that looks slightly like an infant pachyderm's back. It makes sense. I've heard worse rationale, but guess again, and first clear your head of any internal clutter. After much research and conversations with various anglers, we were told the following. Take a deep breath and get your mind right. Ready? It's called Baby Elephant because there's a deepish hole midstream which a baby elephant could stand in fully immersed without you seeing it. Gestate on that. Which was making me laugh as I was reading it. And that's the sort of feel of the book, intertwined with music as well. And I'm lucky enough to share similar music views as him as well. But we sort of kind of know bits like that, don't we? Pools we all probably fish that have weird and wonderful names, or we call it a spot, or, you know, I've got various honey hole pools I call honey hole. And then there's one I thought was honey hole, but not honey hole. And bits like that, but he does make me laugh, and a really, really great read.
I think it was after so he was a visitor to one of your earlier podcasts, wasn't he, Pete?
Yes.
I picked up, I think, his first book. Was it Terminal Chancer?
Yes.
After that, and I think there was a little discussion on Twitter about it. So I picked it up, and yeah, you're right. It was such a hysterical read, and I think he mentioned in one of his books that I think he went on to win a competition following a very heavy night out. I think on well, we'll just leave it at that. Readers need to read it. But yeah, you're right. Absolutely hysterical. Wonderful book.
Yeah, very contemporary.
Yes.
Really, really interesting, and yeah, great guy. And yeah, check the podcast I did with him a little while back now. It is a very, very amusing one too. But what have you got next? What's your next one?
So this, I think, is my last one. Right. So in order to play it a little safe, I had to choose a Kerak. You knew I would. But this one is not the one. I thought I'd stay away from it. So it wasn't Trout Bum, but this one. So they all, for me, they tend to get better and better. And you know, and obviously they're quite relative to what we're experiencing now. I think Brexit is even mentioned in this one. So this one is the latest one, Dumb Luck and the Kindness of Strangers. Yeah, you gotta have Girak in your lives, I think. It's just so easy reading. I think each small story or short story or essay is brilliant. His adventures, his love for fish and shop dogs. They just they get better with each release. And for a 74-year-old, I believe he's pretty cool. You know, I know he coined the term trout bum, and he is just that. Sort of fishes all year, and then does his day job during the winter of just writing. And I think the fact that I find it quite funny that obviously he writes in the winter, his releases are usually early year. When he says that it's the trout season start and his publishers just want him to go on book tours, and the fishing's good, and the blue-winged olives, as he puts it, are coming off. So again, as I mentioned, Tom McGuain's mate. They've fished together. They've known each other, and and written together. So quote-wise, so from this newest book, again, so many quotes really, but this one kind of hit home. It was fishing in Labrador, as he does a lot of his fishing, usually by some boat plane landing in the middle of nowhere. But so it was fishing in Labrador that finally cured me of my compulsive scorekeeping. Of course, it's an ongoing struggle, but whereas once I'd get envious when someone went on too long about how many fish they caught and how big they were, now that large dog that lives in my mind just rolls over and goes to sleep. So it kind of, it makes me chuckle, because we all know, the guys that, I caught 100 fish today and they were this big and this, and you just, okay, cool, let's crack on. But brilliant.
Lovely. His books, and there'll be many people listening, for me have been life changing.
Yeah.
I read during lockdown, I read a bunch of them, the early ones. Again, I reckon every single one of them. The latest one I've read just the once, and I'll come back to that. I think I've read every one 5 or 6 times, and I still get something out of them. And they take me to a place I like to be. And that's what I really enjoy about it. And he's obviously influenced so many of us in the way that we look at fishing, how we feel about fishing, that he probably doesn't even realize it or wouldn't want to be attributed to that as well. But I think, he is a wonderful writer, and like I say, has had a massive impact on myself, and sounds like yourself and many others, about fishing. And I think that may be where that need to catch, as you said in that piece there, need to catch big fish or numbers of fish. He just doesn't care really, does he? And I think that probably consciously or subconsciously lodges in your mind when you're fishing.
Yeah, I think so. And then, well, from a sort of comedy flip side, so you mentioned that sort of perfect sum it up kind of quote there, but then again, he sort of mentions that, or he references Tom McGuain, and he said, Thomas McGuain, who once said, fishing isn't really about success. But then, as John says, but if that enlightened sentiment were true, we wouldn't all howl obscenities at missed fish. So he's quite realistic about the approach as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Fantastic. I'm pleased you put one of those in there, because they are, just such good books. Right, my last one. This is a book I've not read for a long time now, but it was just so beautifully put together. And it's by Harry Middleton. It's called The Earth is Enough.
Good choice.
Have you read this?
I've not, but this was one of my backups on the spine of time, just in case.
And he's a beautiful writer, isn't he?
Yes. Quite. I wouldn't say different, but it's a. Yeah, go on. It's a different storytelling power that he has, I think.
And this one is based in 1965, and when he's young, and he went through a traumatic experience. I won't spoil it in case you do buy it, but he went to live for a short time with his grandfather and uncle in the Ozark Mountains. And they lived a very simple, frugal life, and shunned technology, shunned the modern world, and farmed and fished. And I'm going to read a short section from his book here. Such a fish demanded, of course, special attention, certain consideration, a method of pursuit as finicky and fastidious as their own behaviour. A curious fish insists on a curious form of angling, one heavy with respect, tradition, skill, and challenge. If there was only one fish in the lives of Albert and Emerson, and soon me, so was there only one correct way to fish for it, with the fly rod. And not just any rod, but a subtle, willowy, handmade bamboo fly rod, a good line, and trustworthy reel, tippets as delicate as gossamer, and the smallest dry flies possible. And it talks, as I said, the thread through it is fishing, but him recovering from a difficult time in their company. And of course, time moved on and things have moved on from what seemed like a simple time then. And it's quite an emotional book. It's beautifully crafted. And I would really, really recommend people, if they haven't read it already, give that one a look too. What is the other Middleton book about?
So this one is On the Spine of Time, a fly fisher's journey among mountain people, streams, and trout. So, funny enough, I'm only halfway through this, but the initial chapters talk about his sort of trip into the mountains, and he sort of camps out rough, and he's trying to fish, but there's still sort of a heavy snowpack. It's very much, and again, another sort of adventure book. But as you rightly say, it's quite deep in how it's crafted, I think, rather than some of the other sort of more light-hearted reads. It really is. I think Middleton's books really need they're not a nighttime before bed sort of read. You need to put the time aside and really absorb them properly. But yeah, wonderful books.
And are there any others that you were thinking about that you wanted to include on the list?
Yes, there were three. So I've already named one of them. So On the
Yep.
Spine of Time, but also another two. So Ted Leeson is another favored author, and his The Habit of Rivers is a
Yep.
particularly
Great
good
book.
one. Yeah. And then lastly, I had to name it. Not so much a fishing book, although fishing is in it, but of course, A River Runs Through It by Norman MacLean. Again, it's a bit of a tragedy, really, as a story, isn't it? Fishing is a big part of it, but it just shows that the real sort of view of a family going through life. That none of them have all the answers. Fishing is what kind of ties them together and gives them their sort of break from life, I suppose. But even the father, being this man of God and the patriarch of the family, fails to help in some respects. And it's not a perfect world story. Some tragedies, but yeah, if I'm sure that um, a high majority of the listeners have seen the film. If you haven't, then get and see it. But first, I'd read the book if you could. They're wonderful.
Great. Great. This is interesting. We've not really chosen how-to books. I own lots of fly fishing books and how-to books, which I've really, really enjoyed. And this one probably won't appeal to you in the same way, but I think the Topher Brown Salmon Magic is just beautiful, packed with information, and is a slightly more modern look at fly fishing for salmon, which I think is great. Stephen Jones, as we both know, his book on sea trout is sea trout. I think needed an update a little bit more, and I think that's done that
Certainly.
really, really well. And Theo Pike's book, Trout in Dirty Places, as well. That's inspired so many people to look in different places for trout that are going about their business, probably, under a road bridge or in a city or wherever it might be. And I think those are really great ones. And being an instructor as well, Gareth, I guess to a small degree, casting books are superseded a little by videos and YouTube and everything else now. But did you ever have casting books that you think, if someone's looking to sharpen up their casting a little bit, would be useful for them to read?
Yeah, absolutely. So got a few behind me actually. So Galsworth, yeah, Simon Galsworth. A lot of books on well, he's the spey god, really, isn't he? And certainly the single-handed spey book that he did was really good. I mean, when you look at some casting videos, even though they are moving, quite often they're sort of paused. Certainly from a spey cast perspective, so that you can understand maybe the anchor point or the D loop. So quite often not they're you know freeze framed anyway. So yeah, from book perspective, they work quite nicely. And then what was the chap's name, Pete? I'm going to cheat. Jason Borger did another wonderful fly casting book, The Nature of Fly Casting. Brilliant. Yeah. They've got an absolute permanent place in the bookshelf. Well worth reads if anybody's interested in tightening up the casting. Certainly winter's the time to practice and get reading.
Good choices. They were the two I was going to say as well. And even Simon's double-handed spey casting book as well is no nonsense, full of information that's easy to understand. And I think that's the important thing. You can easily get bogged down in the technical aspect of it, but he shows really clearly the movements required for, as you say, the double-handed and, as you have said, sorry, the single-handed spey casting as well. And Jason's book as well is really, really good. He's been a contributor to Fly Culture as well, and how his modular approach by learning the basic cast and then adding sections onto that is such a smart idea as well. So if you have your foundation cast, then you can add bits into it, which I think is a really smart and really great way to understand fly casting in a straightforward way. So they're really, really good. So that's been fantastic. We've chatted for over an hour about these books. I think we could have gone on for hours as well with these and chosen. It seems as though 5 was the right amount.
Good number.
And I've really enjoyed, it's inspired me again to think about, go through the bookshelf again. And sometimes you can leave the book and pick it back up again. And as I said, with the Girac ones, but many others as well, pick them up again and read them and enjoy them. And they feel time when you want to be near a river and can't be there, or near the water. And sometimes it just sort of lifts you a little bit just to read those. And they are fantastic. And in a world that seems to move so quickly, if there is any upside, and I don't think there is, but if there is to COVID, it allowed me to sit down again and enjoy reading books and spending a lot more time doing that. So I hope that long continues. And I've really enjoyed chatting these through with you, Gareth.
Likewise. Thanks, Pete. And yeah, just to add, I mean, winter's coming up. The rivers are going to be up more if last year is going to be anything to go by. So sometimes for the chaps and the ladies that do like to read as their sort of primary focal point towards the fishing world, when they can't get out, then it's nice just to, maybe a weekend when the river's up and you're rained off, then just grab a coffee or whatever drink you want and just revisit the book collection. It's a lovely way to spend the day.
A good cigar and a book, yeah?
Perfect, even better.
Yeah. Gareth, thank you so much again for being a guest on the Fly Culture podcast. Again, I've really, really enjoyed having you along. So thank you for chatting through with me. And not an easy one to do, is it? That you got to sit and read as well. So we've done everything in one take. So it is as it is, and it's honest, and it is. And thank you so much for doing that, because I know it's a big ask.
No, my absolute pleasure, Pete. And as always, thank you for having me.
Fantastic. Thank you, Gareth, again. Everyone, this has been the Fly Culture podcast, a little bit different. I hope you've enjoyed this one as much as me. And of course, as ever, keep enjoying the next ones. We've got plenty more planned for you. So I look forward to releasing those in time, but hopefully you're enjoying your fishing and getting out there. But thanks again for listening to the Fly Culture podcast.